Welcome everyone to this town hall. My name is Reverend Dr. Katie Gibbons-KIME. I'm the Director of Religion and Civic Engagement at Odyssey Impact. And just a quick bit about Odyssey, we are an interfaith media nonprofit which drives social change through innovative storytelling and media and connecting faith and secular communities. We are the producers of the film series Healing the Healers, which provides faith leaders and educators with conversations which actually are just like today, sharing intimate, candid conversations between colleagues about how it really is in the most challenging spiritual care and justice crises. So a quick thanks to our amazing partners. First, the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, who's been a partner on many of these town halls. We so appreciate their leadership in the pandemic and in supporting spiritual care providers of all kinds. And also a new partner for us, the Interfaith Network on Mental Illness. Also a great support for clergy and spiritual caregivers of all kinds across faith traditions. And you'll see a little bit more about them in the chat as well. Given the weight and urgency of our topic today, I need to say, it's just a sincere honor to have this conversation with these colleagues today. The Odyssey team, we've spent many hours having many conversations with faith leaders and chaplains working on the front lines with young adults and teens. And these 5 colleagues today are just really special humans. Panelists, would you just take a moment to briefly say hello and introduce yourselves?
Greetings and peace to you all. I'm JAWAD BAYAT. I'm the Muslim chaplain and an ACP educator at the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio. And I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Good afternoon. My name is Reverend Dr. Danielle Bahoro. I'm an ACPE certified educator at Advocate Healthcare in the Illinois-Wisconsin area. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Hello, everyone. I am Dr. ROLF NOLASCO, Professor of Pastoral Theology at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in Evanston, Illinois. Glad to be here with you all.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel WARSHAWSKY. I'm the engagement director for the Midwest region of United Synagogue Youth, which is a Jewish youth group. I'm here from Chicago, Illinois, and I'm excited to be here.
My name is Scott WEIMER, and I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. For the last 30 years, I've been a pastor in congregations in Atlanta that have many children, youth, and young adults. I stepped away from congregational ministry a year ago, and I'm working now with a nonprofit to end the stigma, shame, and silence around mental health issues inside and outside communities of faith. Good to be here.
Thank you so much, all of you. So right now we are facing compounding stress and exhaustion, and our children, our teens, and our young adults are vulnerable, and spiritual care and support is crucial as mental health needs and as crisis are touching so many of us, our families and our communities right now. We want to let everyone know that among other mental health topics, one of the subjects we will be discussing today is suicide. And while we hope that everyone feels comfortable throughout today's discussion, we do want to remind everyone that if you are experiencing suicidal ideation and or any desire to hurt yourself or to harm yourself, help is available. And powerful resources like the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, that's 800-273-TALK, it'll also be pasted in the text, and the crisis text line. You just text HOME to, again, the number will be in there, 741-741. They provide assistance 24/7 for anyone feeling depressed, overwhelmed, or suicidal. Please know that if you become distressed at any point today and just feel the need to leave the webinar, we will be recording today's conversation, and you can always come back to it at a later date. So let's dig in. I would just love to ask the 5 of you, based on your context and your life experience, when it comes to this topic, what is top of mind for you? And Daniel, would you mind going first?
Yeah, I think that the thing that's on the top of my mind right now is the amount of positivity that's been going around among teens, among people in our country, on planet Earth. We have celebrities that are trying to find the positive in everything that they're doing. We have celebrities that are making television shows based on good news. And one of the things that I've been thinking about in relation to that is the fact that we're all going through this collective trauma right now. And with all this positivity, I get concerned, and I talk about this a lot with the teens that I work with, that they're not getting the chance to kind of process all of the losses that we're all experiencing right now. For me, I call this toxic positivity, where the positivity was so overwhelming that we're just not paying attention to the negative things that are happening. And sometimes it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to remember that we can go through hard times and we can process those hard times together. And it doesn't always need to be overwhelming positivity in order for us to be okay in these times. So that's really on the top of my mind.
Thanks. That's such a good word. And that you have the poster behind you. Danielle, would you mind sharing next? Just what's on top of mind for you on this topic?
Yes, what's on the top of my mind on this particular topic is the ways in which suicide is growing concerning African American teens and young adults in particular. And I venture to say that it is so important for us to give some attention to the ways in which specifically African American teens and young adults are grappling in light of two pandemics that we are faced with today. Many think that we are only wrestling with one pandemic called COVID-19, but for persons of African descent, we've been in another pandemic for the last 400 to 500 years related to or related to law enforcement, mass incarceration, and in particular police brutality. And so I'm interested in thinking about the ways in which police brutality and COVID-19 in some sense are causing more and more African American teens in particular to grapple with suicide and suicide ideation.
Thank you. It's powerful and true. Jawad, would you mind sharing next?
Yeah, sure. So what's on the top of my mind is about coming from my own experience of creating or influencing a culture within our own spheres, be it family, friends, coworkers, community, congregations, where having conversations on mental health would be just as normal as having a conversation about our body health. Because as I've observed in my own immigrant or first generation and so on communities, there's reticence about even addressing and referring to it other than doing it so reactively. So we may not speak to just anyone about it, but at the least it wouldn't be unusual. So I'm thinking as faith leaders and chaplains, we have this special role where we are perhaps trained to see the openings to enter into where we can help folks feel accepted and to affirm our common humanity. So to put the person first rather than the condition. So I find from my experience integrating this attitude so it may impact my relationships has had a normalizing influence.
Yeah, there really are special opportunities that clergy and that spiritual care providers have in this time to model. Rolf, would you mind sharing? Top of mind?
No, not at all. For someone who's teaching at Garrett Seminary and someone who's preparing to teach psychopathology next week and online, one thing that I have been thinking about, and I think one thing that it's important for me personally, but for my students and everyone else to remember, is that mental health issues do not happen in a vacuum. The experience of depression and anxiety and traumatic stress, suicidality, substance abuse, and other forms of mental unwellness, particularly within the queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, operates within the context of social relations, structures, and systems that are built on sacred violence, exploitation, and oppression. And so part of what I want to be doing is to continue to resist and interrogate those systems of injustices that surrounds all of us, that in turn impacts personal and collective sense of mental wellness.
Thank you so much. And last, but certainly not least, Scott, what's top of mind for you on this topic?
Sure. Thanks so much, Katie. Even before COVID, we were in a mental health crisis in the United States. And And yet I was finding in congregational leadership that it was difficult to talk about these issues related to mental health. And there was pushback when I tried to do it, and I made mistakes in learning how to do it. But I've found it so crucial that we, as faith leaders, learn how to speak about these issues, because almost everyone in our congregations, our communities of faith, is struggling in one way or another. And so eliminating the stigma, shame, and silence is just critical. And faith leaders are so important in helping to create a more healthy environment to talk about these issues. I'm also thinking personally that we're coming up in our family on a 5-year anniversary of our son's death by suicide as a young adult, beginning of his senior year in college. And I'm so grateful for a congregation and for family and friends that had the courage to help put me and our family on the road to healing. And it's an example of how communities of faith can be such powerful agents of healing their own faith leaders, but finding their own healing in so doing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that and for being with us today, Scott. The ways in which faith leaders are personally touched by these issues is this isn't just not always just professional ways, personal as well. In advance of this town hall, we received so many excellent advanced questions from panelists. For instance, from Iris, she said, "I'm the bereavement minister in my church, and how do teens and young adults seek help, especially living within?" And then this is representing other questions we got, living within this Zoom social media world. With social, Denise from Chicago asked, with social distancing and limits and physical interactions, how can faith leaders best engage youth other than the cloud? And then similarly, Hannah in Texas, what are best practices for creating virtual safe spaces for teens? So just on that topic, Daniel, would you start us off by just thinking about like, what's the context in which teens and young adults are in right now in this Zoomosphere and the kind of help that they can get?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for that. When I think about the teens that I'm working with, and when I talk to them, one of the things that they say most of all is that, you know, it's so wonderful that we live in this world that's never been more connected, where we have cell phones and texting and Zoom and Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and all these, and TikTok and all these different things that teens and young people are using to stay connected to each other. But at the same time, every time you get on a Zoom call or a Google Hangout or Zoom School, it's yet another reminder of what we can't be doing together. It's another reminder that you're sitting alone in your room or in your kitchen or wherever it is, as opposed to being in a classroom with your friends, or as opposed to getting to really hug the people that you are missing and aren't with. So I think that it's both that they're having this feeling of disconnectedness, even in this connectedness that we all have, and they're also, I think a lot of them are feeling just unable to express that, to get that physical touch thing that we all crave so much, of being able to embrace the people that they love and care about.
Thank you. That's really true. And you know, also there's within some faith communities, there's differences across generational divides, and I'm just wondering, and thinking about that, Danielle, you've had some really great insights about the meaning making that is different across generation divides.
Yeah, in some sense, for African American community, there was always two dynamics that seemed to help preserve our spirit and keep us encouraged. And those two entities have been my favorite two R words, race and religion. It was this notion, or it has been this notion that as an African American person, we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, our elders who have gone on before us. And so we tend to highlight many times our ancestors and elders who successfully navigated through African enslavement from 1619 to 1865, and then the period of Jim Crow from 1865 to 1954, and then finally through the period of the Civil Rights Movement from 1954 to the 1970s. There was this, there's been this idea that one should not, quote unquote, give up or throw in the towel because one stands on the backs of those who have gone before. Also, second, there's this notion that our religion, for many African Americans in the Protestant faith tradition, teaches us that God does not ordain suicide or suicidal ideation. And so there are three major African American religious Christian traditions: Methodist, Baptist, and our Pentecostal or Church of God in Christ church. And so in some sense, what we're experiencing today is African American teens and young adults are saying, no, I don't have to carry some mantle from the ancestors who have gone on before me. And no, I may not necessarily believe that God is not calling me to engage in thoughts around suicide. And so we must begin to, in many African American circles, rethink, revision, re-strategize what spiritual care to young adults and teens looks like around suicide prevention and suicide support, because no longer can we find hope or use as a source of hope race and religion.
Yeah. And you know, across the also we have a question from the chat of how do you get teens and young adults to ask for help? What are practical tips? That's a question that was just asked, and it's reflective of many of our questions in advance too. How do we get teens to ask for help? I'll just open that for any of you to answer.
I'm happy to start.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is important with this is not necessarily thinking about suicide as the disease, but as a symptom of something else, and it's a symptom of the mental health issues that a lot of teens are struggling with. I think that perspective shift first of all, kind of normalizes the idea of being able to talk about it, because if you talk about it as a symptom and not as this horrible thing, it kind of takes some of that stigma away. I also think that us talking about it and being open about our own experiences of people who we know, experiences of family members is really important. I am a person that's in the past struggled with suicidal ideation, and one of the things that I make sure to talk to my teens about is the fact that that's something that that I struggled with before. So they know all the more so that I'm someone that they can talk to if they are struggling, or if they know someone that's struggling, they can direct them in my way or someone else that I know's way, to make sure that they're getting that help.
Yep.
I'll jump in too. Oh, excuse me, Katie.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, I so agree with what Daniel said about the importance of faith leaders talking about these issues. We need to normalize talking about mental health in our communities of faith, so that we can talk about them in our families and within our circle of friends. Because addressing mental health at any age, especially for young people, it requires a community of support. And oftentimes that community of support, friends and family, don't know how to support their loved one. They're ill-equipped to do it. And and so what we found is that once it was so public that we were dealing with the death of a child by suicide, and I'd been in a congregation a long time and had a lot of contacts throughout the city, people began to come to me and talk to me about their own issues for themselves as parents, as grandparents, and kids themselves who were struggling. And it just struck me that this was happening before I ever knew anything about it. Like, they were struggling so much, and this is a generational issue too, because I think my generation, we can't relate to what kids are growing up in. We don't know that culture. I can't imagine how oppressive in some ways the social media community is. And there's a lot of wonderful aspects to it as well. But one of the most gratifying comments I received from one of the young people in our congregation was, on one Sunday, she just came up. She was a 10th grader in high school. And she said, "Dr. Scott, I just want you to know that I was suicidal 10 days ago, and I checked myself into a psychiatric hospital. And I'm on medication. I'm stabilized now. And I just wanted you to know." And I thought, that's so healthy that it's still, and we're so important as faith leaders in helping change that culture to remove the stigma and the shame and the silence around these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Danielle, were you going to say something?
Yes. I so appreciate what Daniel and Scott are saying, and to piggyback on their conversations and comments, I think it also is important for us to think about, in particular in Christian context, how are we preaching behind this sacred desk on mental wellness? What are we preaching? What are we specifically saying about suicide and mental wellness on Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. For many of our Christian churches? I also think it's important to think about, in grappling with the sacred text for those of the Christian faith, to really rethink maybe particular biblical characters had mental illness and we're too afraid to say. I don't know about you, but when I read the epistles, I have often thought and wondered, maybe Apostle Paul struggled with some mental illness, given the way many of his comments and statements in our sacred text of the New Testament often seemed a bit irrational. And what would it look like for us to push back against our sacred text in Christian communities and say, I wonder if this biblical character may have had some mental illness concerns. And so I think that's what we do on Sunday mornings, particularly in the Christian community, is very important around this topic.
And I think to exactly that point about culture and narrative and what kind of culture we're setting in our spiritual care spaces and in our congregations and the kind of messages we give, it's reminding me of something I've been learning from ROLF about just the kind of messages that are important for us to hear. And in particular, since we know that another group disproportionately affected by suicide among young people is the LGBT community, that teens and youth struggling with those issues are disproportionately affected by this issue. And Rolf, I think you know what the B word I'm thinking that I just love that you say.
Well, the Trevor Project actually did a study on the implications of COVID-19 for queer and trans youth mental health, and outlined several strategies. And I'll name one of them, and then I'll offer one myself. One is to increase positive social interactions. And part of that would be to encourage, or even to, encourage our teens and young adults to say it's okay to not be okay, just like what's on behind Daniel's flag there, or saying, and really validating their experience, that what you're experiencing right now matters. and that we are here to journey with you, to accompany you during this very difficult time. And part of that would be educating our churches. This is something that's been said already, about how to spot youth when they are showing symptoms of depression, anxiety, and particularly if they're thinking about suicide. And this is something that we can all learn as faith leaders, is to do some psychoeducation along those issues so that we can then enable ourselves to spot those kids and young adults who are in some ways evidencing some of those symptoms. We can also utilize resources within the church. We've got Christian therapists, psychologists in the church who can do psychoeducation on a regular basis. Part of spiritual health is mental health. The two are actually not divorced. Part of caring for the soul of another person is to look at them holistically. But for my queer and trans siblings of all colors and shapes and degrees of fabulousness, in the movie Moana, and I watched Moana, Moana said to Tefiti, remember who you are. And who are we exactly as queer and trans, Black, Indigenous people of color? Who are we? Here's my take on that question. And I hope that this will somehow be a bread to your journey. Yes, you are loved as you are. And your love, your queer love is as pure and genuine and true as the love of another person. So let us celebrate that love. Love that mirrors the consummate love of Christ. A victimless, gratuitous, and creative love that declares with such delightful cheer that you are without a doubt God's beloved queer. And I think that is something that I would like to just kind of share to my queer and trans community of all shapes and colors and fabulousness.
Yes, belovedness, I love it.
Yeah, you know, to jump in the conversation as well, you know, as I'm thinking about this within my own communities and about mental health, there's a layer, you know, within general, you know, American communities, there might be this, we talk about stigma, but there's something else that I don't know how many of folks from my own immigrant kind of first generation kind of communities are thinking about when it comes to honor and dishonor. So for instance, when like, so what I see in my own communities is just this aspect of, if I were to talk about this mental health, if I were to name it, if I were to speak about it, I might bring dishonor to my family, might bring dishonor to my community. I might, if you think of like a white sheet, like this white shirt, there might be a little spot that's on here, and that'll shame my community, shame myself, my family. And sometimes, you know, I haven't seen research about this, but I think a lot of this has to do with like marriage prospects as well, being able to meet someone, right? And so I know in our communities, folks try to keep them on the hush hush, not talk about it, keep it hidden, as a way to, you know, try to save face. You got it? So when it's seen as like, when the person is identified with, you know, the illness, then that's very much the direction it's going to go towards. But when it's not, when it's seen as part of the human condition, right? Like mental health is something we all have, you know, and then so like, why not talk about it? Just like, this is part of our condition. And so I get very passionate about this within my own friends, family. I mean, so I start the conversation with myself, and it's not a weakness to talk about it. I don't bring, and I'm in a special place. So I want to use my platform, my authority, my own training, my opportunities, you know. So what I appreciate what Daniel brought up earlier is that like we can use our own narrative, our own story. I mean, so they ask, how do you do it? You model it, but you have to be genuine and authentic about it as well. And, you know, teens, young adults can see right through, you know, our facade, you know, so we got to be real.
Generationally, authenticity is a huge marker for people who are in their 20s and teens, statistically.
I also think another addition to this is also rethinking, connecting sociology to this conversation as well. African American youth, teens, and young adults struggle at the highest rates social injustices. According to the Centers for Disease Control, it is African American persons who have the highest rates of poverty, unemployment, lack of housing, and an inability to see a medical doctor, or lack of healthcare insurance. And so when we talk about suicide and mental illness, it is so important for us to also connect the dots to the ways in which social injustice and healthcare disparities also impact one's mental health. And so what can faith leaders do? What can the church do? I would push the church to think about what are the social service initiatives that a particular faith community is becoming involved in, particularly around poverty, unemployment, lack of affordable health care, and housing. On top of that, number 5, the 5th pivotal issue right now is police brutality. According to a clinical psychologist by the name of Monica Williams, there now is research from the American Psychological Association that now says that there is such dynamic that is called racial trauma that many African American persons, young people in particular, are now experiencing as a result of police brutality that happens on a larger, wider scale in society, as well as a result of daily racial microaggressions that are committed against African American bodies right now. And so I think it's so important for us to also talk about the systemic social needs that contribute to mental illness as well for particular populations.
Danielle, I so appreciate what you've said. And I think it was Jonathan Walton, who's a professor and chaplain at Harvard University, who said, when white people try to talk about racism, it's like walking in quicksand. And yet white people, if we're serving congregations, we have to find a way to address systemic racism. I think it's important for those, I'm speaking now mainly to white leaders of communities of faith, that we need to give permission to the congregation to push back on our language, but to also say, we're gonna find language to talk about these issues because there's way too much at stake. And I may make some mistakes as I talk about it, but you help me find the language. And I also wanted to say to white faith leaders that, you know, I was so amazed by a couple of African-American members of the church that I was serving. I've been gone a year. And they let me know that they saw me at a Black Lives Matter protest. And I actually was asked to speak and offer a prayer. And they told me that it lifted their spirits so much that I cared and that I would show up. And so white congregations, you know, we got to show up because that's also a mental health issue. It's the same is true with I believe, with gay pride parades and affirming those who are marginalized. Even if we don't know what to do practically, showing up is really important, not only for what we're going to learn, but it's also a statement of how much we care.
Absolutely. Got sort of a really direct question to Imam BAYAT in the chat question. It said, how much has anti-Muslim prejudice affected the young people in your community? Do the young people in your community have a venue where they can share their concerns and fears and anger? I would imagine this might be a factor in depression.
So I can't speak for the whole Muslim community, clearly, but I can speak to my own kind of communities that I've, but let's put it in context too. I mean, so much of like anti-Muslim sentiment was also brought up with Trump's election, right? So with all that being, you know, so you have post, 9/11, all that, the anti-Muslim sentiment then, and then with Trump's election, about 50% or more at least voted for him, and so there's this association with anti-Muslim prejudice. We know when the ban happened, all that stuff. This has to impact the psyche of Muslims, right? And when we see things associated with his name, when you see his name, there are associations that occur in the mind of many Muslims, whether they feel safe or not. It's a psychological thing. It's a matter of association. You see a name and you think, am I safe here? Do I belong here? And you think about it as a minority experience, right? Acceptance and belonging, rejection play a large role, right? In our space here. So of course it could affect. So think about that, and you think about COVID-19. I mean, these are the great exacerbators, right? If the depression is already there, they kind of increase it perhaps more, or make the conditions more ripe for them.
Yep.
What the venue is, I can't say for sure, and I don't know if all our Muslim communities are doing the best they can, but it's also a struggle right now too, because there's a limitation to the fact that for the past 6 months, many communities have closed their actual doors, right? And it's all very much Zoomified or video. So it's a struggle, and I would hope that at least I know within my family and my friends, I mean, that's probably the space where I would hope that that's where they could go to their friends, folks they trust. I mean, there are supports out there. I know that, my community in Jersey, it's very much where I grew up. That's very much how the teenagers and young adults are still being kind of connected with. I don't know what else to say for now.
No, that's good.
Another dynamic that I think is important to add to this conversation is, and I can't say this enough, is how are we supporting legislation during this time? We have someone who was voted into office as president of this country, who has caused much emotional and psychological crisis and turmoil to particular people. And so when we also grapple with the question of what can we do, I'm also inviting us to think about how we're showing up to the polls during this election season. Who are we voting for? Is going to become very, very pivotal in this conversation. Also, I think it's important to highlight, we've spent some time trying to prescribe what we think people, youth in particular, teens need. A simple question that I think is so important to ask is, how can I support you? How can I support you? I think we as clergy, faith leaders, chaplains, spend a lot of time prescribing to teens and youth what we think they need, instead of simply asking, how can I support you? I don't believe that teens and young people actually use the term, oh, I'm struggling with suicide, right? It's rare that someone who struggles with suicide will actually use the word suicide. And so language, we may want to be careful and sensitive with language in this conversation, and really think about how do we come alongside teens and young adults and simply just say, hey, noticed you've been having some challenges lately. What do you need? How can I support you? And instead of thinking that we have the answers and we know what would help teens and young people.
Yeah, I think you are nailing exactly, Danielle, something that's so important, because this is like one of the most frequently asked questions in the chat now and in advance is like, how do I help? Like recently we got said something that said, what might be a strategy to open up conversation, especially when a teen is hiding their thoughts in silence? One note before we go to that question though, there's so many great resources that have been uplifted in the chat. And we want to just make clear that we are going to make a PDF and share for anyone who registered for the event. And then we'll also put it on the website of everything that's been uplifted so folks are able to return to that. If you are one who's trying to copy and paste from the chat, no worries. You also can, we'll also provide that for you. So other thoughts from the rest of you, what are the ways that are helpful, like the care strategies as we come alongside, as Danielle said, come alongside youth? Danielle, it looks like you had.
Yeah, I think that it's a really important point and a really important question. I'm glad that it was brought up. First of all, I think Scott's Rolf brought it up earlier about the idea of making sure that we're aware of the signs of mental health disorders and signs of suicide ideation. That as faith leaders and people who work with young people, that's one of the most important things that we can do. I also think that it's really important on that note of how do you help someone who's struggling in their silence, to remember that like it's paramount that we're approaching those young people, that we're the ones that are starting those conversations. Because speaking from personal experience, one of the most difficult things to do when you're struggling with suicide is ask for help. That there's something inside you that makes it impossible to say those words, to say, friend, faith leader, whatever you are, I need help and I'm struggling. It's not something that generally happens on its own. And I think in a lot of situations, it's asking the questions that Danielle was talking about of, how can I help you best? What do you need from me? Are you okay? Those questions are really important. And I also want to say to everyone that it's using the word suicide is more than okay. Oftentimes, when someone is struggling to that extent, if they hear the word suicide, or if they hear the words, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about killing yourself? It opens it up for them to say yes. It means that to that person, it means that they know that you are thinking about it and you know that they care enough to ask that question. And the worst that can happen is a person says no. And the best that can happen is that you save someone's life.
And Daniel,
don't y'all think also, just interject, like that there is a sense of among faith leaders that if we say it, that will introduce the idea of it, right? Like, and maybe Scott, that's where you were going.
well, I was going to say that one of the reasons we have to normalize talking about these things, using the word suicide, is because like peers need to be watching out for peers, and they don't know how in many cases. So I know that with our son, there were some signs that people saw, and mostly his friends were incredibly supportive. But in a couple of really important moments, we so wish that one of his friends had called us, and he didn't, because he didn't want to betray the confidence of our son, but he knew our son was struggling. But we could have intervened. And so when we can normalize having these conversations, like a friend would know, like, I'm going to take a risk here because there's too much at stake. So I'm going to call his dad, and or someone. Like, when you see it, we need to, if we are normalizing these conversations, we're equipping the community, and the community can help.
I think part of normalizing the conversation is to actually ask close-ended question. Are you thinking about harming yourself? Are you thinking about committing suicide? Do you have access to weapons and things like that? Because that is an important way of assessing where they're at when it comes to their ideation. But I think more corollary to that, in terms of the ways we relate to teens and young adults, I think it would be helpful for us to operate from a place of strength, not scarcity. And by that I mean, we can reframe this particular age group, 12 to 25 years old, as people, individuals who are not just having to get through this stage on their way to their higher level of consciousness and maturity. But this is actually the time where their brains are connecting and integrating, which in turn through our own accompaniment as faith leaders, we can accompany them by taking the opportunity to harness their longings for social engagement, emotional intensity, and creativity and novelty-seeking behavior, which really are manifestations of this group of people, that we can channel that creatively. And part of what we need to do then as faith leaders to always keep the brain in mind when we talk about some of these issues. And Dan Siegel's book, if I could just recommend this, Dan Siegel's book, A Brainstorm, The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain, expounds on these issues, points quite insightfully and practically. And it's a really, really good book to have.
That's awesome.
Yep.
I think another question, thank you so much for that, Ralph. I think another question that we need to explicitly ask is what or who are you called to be? And what are you called to do during this time? Eric Erickson says that it is between this teenage years and young adult years that we see our teens and young adults are really beginning to wrestle with identity and purpose. And so I think it's also very important to ask an explicit direct question around what are you called to be? Who are you called to be? What are you called to do during this time in your life? And for African American teens and young adults in particular, I would modify that question a bit to say, what are you called to be, or who are you called to be, and what are you called to do in light of racism and police brutality and systemic oppressions that exist today? Because in some sense, persons of color, African American teens in particular, are always having to create their identity in light of systemic social injustices that exist. And so really beginning to help teens grapple with existential reflective questions around identity, life meaning, and purpose become pivotal, become huge. Asking this question also helps your teen and young adult begin to think about what are their gifts, what are their skills, what are their talents that they may have forgotten or don't really pay much attention to as they're grappling with suicidal ideation. And so it becomes wonderful ways of reinforcing gifts and skills and talents for our young persons as well to engage in this type of exercise.
I think that question of what are you called to do is a really important question. And what are your gifts? In Hebrew, the way that we say mental health is briut nefesh, which means the health of the soul, not just mental health, but the health of the soul. And I think that falls right in line with what Danielle was saying about this, about not just thinking about the immediate situation of what is this person struggling with, but thinking about how do I help nourish this person as an entire being, rather than just this label that they're dealing with, or this situation that they're in this moment. That's a really, really powerful way of explaining it. So thank you, Danielle. I also just want to bring up this. I'm not sure if everyone knows about either of these things, but I would highly recommend that everyone that's on this call and anyone that's a faith leader in general get certified in mental health first aid, both for teens and for adults. Mental health first aid helps people understand how to tell these signs, how to have these conversations. And it's in all of the ones that I've been in, there are so many faith leaders, and it's so wonderful to see that people in this community care so much. And there's another one that's called Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, ASSIST for short. And I would highly recommend that one as well. It really allows you to model having these hard conversations and to role play having these really difficult conversations. It's both of those I think are really, really fantastic resources that we all can be using.
I want, oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to get to one, looking at the time, I wanted to get to one point that folks really brought up fervently, and actually is the reason why we even timed this town hall to happen now, which is going back to school and the virtual, what somebody said, getting Zoomified. Oh, given that, and the chat question was, what about youth facing the isolation and separation issues of now, especially at this time of transition back to school, which is just not the same? Any other specific strategies? I mean, as a mom of a preteen, you know, like gazillions of parents everywhere, this is what I'm facing in terms of and thinking about the brain that's growing in my little preteen's cranium and what's happening. Yeah, any thoughts from any of you about like specific strategies given the Zoomification of things?
I have a few thoughts. So the first thing, there is such a thing as like Zoom fatigue. You know, looking at everyone's face right now, I mean, it's very tiring. So like just being mindful. There's just a lot. So I love everyone's faces
it's a
here.
Lot. It's a lot, JAWAD.
It's a lot to interpret all at once. So that's a real, but that is a real experience, Zoom fatigue. And but in light of that, I think owning that it's very difficult is partly the process. I love Daniel talking about, you know, the toxic positivity. I mean, we don't have to spin it. It is hard. It's difficult. We can name it and also feel how terrible it is. You know, that has done wonders for my own process. I mean, I had, you know, my baby was born, you know, 2.5 months ago. There was a lot of things we couldn't do. You know, we're so grateful for her, and she's beautiful and she's so precious. Yet there was a lot of things we couldn't do. We couldn't have our baby showers we wanted, and it really sucked. You know, it really was the lack of family. My wife, you know, she's British. She wasn't able to have her family come here from England to be here with our daughter and her time. It was really hard on all of us. I cried a bit. She cried a whole bunch too. We felt the emotion that came up with it. I think that and paying attention to my own sister, who has my nephews and nieces who are going to be going into it. I mean, that's partly it. There's probably some strategies other folks here can mention, but at least one in terms of how I've been internally dealing with the inner landscape of it all is honoring how difficult it is and feeling it and being okay with that. I mean, there's no way to spin how terrible it is and how hard it is.
Back to Daniel's poster.
It's okay. Yeah, it's not be okay, right?
Danielle.
It's interesting. I have deep struggles around this conversation on online learning. I have deep struggles around this because I have an 11-year-old son, and he was home with me in Chicago for the entire summer. And all day, he wanted to play Fortnite all day with his friends. And so when we talked about his school moving to a full online learning format, he's like, oh my God, Ma, I can't believe I have to do this. I said, I don't want to hear it, because from sun up to sundown, you have no problems playing on Fortnite, right? You have no problems. You have no problems. You have no problems engaging in gaming. And so I think my invitation is for us to rethink not the use of online learning and formatting, but how we're using it. Because our gaming industry has figured out how to use online formatting to make gaming fun and engaging and interesting. And so I think right now we're living in a time period where we're wanting to attack this move to online anything. And I'm inviting us to tap into those particular environments that are using online formatting for other measures that our children, our young people are not having the same type of reactions to, and really grapple with how can we make online learning fun just as much as gaming has made online online formatting fun in some sense. I love for us to really think about what is the psychology behind online gaming and how our young people are connected to that in ways that are, in some sense, we think are different to online education.
Just in terms of like a small thing that you can do in Zoom rooms, particularly in relation to the LGBT community. One of the things that my organization has really gotten in the habit of doing is every time we log on to a Zoom call, whoever's leading the call makes sure to remind everyone to add their pronouns, their preferred pronouns to their name in Zoom, so that no one is misgendering anyone in the call, so that when we're talking about people, we're making sure that we're honoring who they are and who they and how they identify. And that's it's not the biggest thing, but it's a small way that shows that we're thinking about these things and that we're working to make this impersonal online space a little bit more personal and a little bit more respectful of everyone in the way that we would normally when we're all together in person.
I developed this tool called Breathe that we can do when we're zooming in and out of life, the universe. Just briefly, so B stands for taking the time to breathe calmly and gently and slowly. R stands for remembering your source of strength and resilience.
Love that.
E is for equanimity or stability and calmness in the face of difficult situations. I think Psalm 4:7 comes to mind here when it comes to that. A is for affect and emotional regulations, which means treating all these painful experiences and emotional responses not as enemies to fight against, but as guests bearing gifts of exploration and action. T is for taking time out from all the noise and focus on what is in front of you. H is for staying at home. And maybe this sheltering in place could be an invitation to shelter in faith or sheltering in relationships. And lastly, E, for exhaling all unnecessary fears, internalized racism, colonial mentality, and inhale that which enlivens you and gives you courage. So BREATHE, I think the link is on the chat right now.
And if it isn't, it also will be part of the PDF that everybody will get of resources. Any other before we go to our last thing, any other last things about like youth isolation, mental health, given the onlineness of right now? Anybody else who hadn't shared yet on that? Okay, all right. Because we want to be really careful and cautious of people's Zoom calls and things they have in the upcoming minutes. I just wanted to ask a quick question of all of you, which is, what is bringing you joy and or hope right now? And I'll just go around my screen. I see Scott first. So Scott, tell us.
So I have an app that is a mindfulness app, and I found the app will read a story or talk me through exercises to go to sleep. And it's a really gentle female voice. And when I put it on and my wife walks in the room, it's like, that's not giving me peace. So anyway, I find it hilarious every time.
Fair. All right, Daniel, you want to follow that?
I'll try. I think that something that's bringing me hope right now is I've been able to read a lot. And right now I've been reading a lot of the queer fiction that didn't exist when I was a kid, or that was very hard to find when I was a kid. And just reading all these stories that finally reflect my identity and the identity of all the kids that I'm working with who identify as part of the LGBT community. It's just so heartwarming that these things exist now and that they're being thought about and that they're visible. So that's really just been bringing a lot of hope to my heart lately.
I love it. And Jawad, besides your gorgeous baby, brand new 2-month-old in your house, maybe that is your joy and hope in addition.
Well, partly part of her being, which is something we're newer, because every day is like something new, and really she's beginning to smile, and that's really brightening up my day. She puts her tongue, like this, and it's really bringing me a lot of joy, and it's something I really look forward to, and I'm learning how to help bring out those smiles even more. So that's something I'm looking forward to.
I love that. And Rolf, how about you?
I think for me, hope resides in witnessing people of color, particularly interrogating and resisting acts of cruelty and violence, both within ourselves and in larger institutions. And hope resides in seeing African Americans take the lead in resisting all sorts of violence and really paying attention to what they're doing, listening and self-educating, because I think that is a good form of being in solidarity with them.
Love it. Thank you. Danielle?
I am excited about the level of creativity in moving our spiritual care profession forward during this time. What I mean by that is I have often grieved or lamented that fundamentally how we understand the profession of spiritual care is that it is all things concerning faith, meditation, prayer, reading of holy scriptures. But I think in light of COVID-19 and police brutality, I think that we are now starting to rethink maybe spiritual care encompasses social needs. Maybe spiritual care encompasses addressing emotional needs. Usually, we've often in this field maintained a disconnect between spirituality on one side, emotional, mental health on another side, and physical, social needs on a whole separate plane. And so I'm excited in that we're really starting to grapple with redefining what spiritual care looks like. And maybe spiritual care is not cut off from these other entities. Maybe spiritual care really encompasses also addressing persons' social, emotional, and mental health needs.
Love it. It's an amazing and hopeful place to close with you all. And just to remind everyone, this entire event has been recorded. It will be available as a free resource on Odyssey's Healing the Healers website. People who registered for it will get a reminder in their email about that, but it's also available to be shared with anyone. Enormous thank you to our esteemed panelists. You five are just immense and beautiful spirits to walk alongside. And I know just selfishly as a parent and a faith leader and thinking about this space, y'all are a gift. And we hope you stay connected, all of you, to Healing the Healers, to the Odyssey Impact Networks, and to the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, and to the Interfaith Network on Mental Illness, our two co-sponsoring organizations. Just want to thank you again for being here. And please reach out to Odyssey if you are wondering, hey, where's the thing? Or if there's any way that we can support you, or if you have thoughts about what our next town hall topic should be in Healing the Healers. Any last words? Well, brilliant panelists. I think Daniel's poster can be our last word. It's okay to not be okay.
Yes.
Amen.
Thank you for the opportunity to be in
Yeah,
conversation with everyone about this.
For sure.
It's been an honor.
All right, go in peace all, and thank you so much.